Okay, in this video, I'm gonna just demonstrate how I like to knead the dough for my sourdough bread. I've got my sourdough here. It's gonna be kind of messy, but as I get a little more into it, just want you to see how basically I like to play with my body mechanics. And essentially what I'm doing when I'm making bread or kneading the dough, in this case, or cooking in the kitchen, is I like to a lot of times just play with integrating the Tai Chi principles, right? And if we're just gonna simplify it, we're gonna say movement comes from the center, right? So you're not really gonna see it so much as I'm just getting this stuff off of the spoon, right? So with this type of a bread, it's got a pretty high water content, so we call that a hydration, and it tends to be a little messy, right? So what I do with the kneading here is just do it for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then you let it rest. You do a stretch and fold process to further condition the gluten, and right, so from there, this looks pretty good. So we can get it on the table. So I try to get it all done within 8 minutes. Right. So once I have it in the bucket, I stick it in the fridge overnight to ferment. That helps to further condition the dough, and it gives it a nice flavor. All right. So here's a good pile of stickiness, and I'm just going to start just doing some basic movement to try to get the clumps out of the dough, right? Because I've got the dough that I've just mixed with the sourdough starter, and I've got some salt in there as well that's got to integrate into the dough. So there's lots of different kneading techniques, but right, what I'm going to do here is just kind of simply use my body to do it. So I'm not going to do it so much through my arms. Right, so it's just this kind of a shifting back and forth of the weight, right? So shift back and forth, right? And just kind of let the body move the hands. Right, so as we go through this, the dough will get stickier, becomes a little more substantial, it becomes a little more difficult to move, right? So then I can really start to feel my own core musculature, my pelvic floor, my hips, my abdominals, my back, right? And I can get all that stuff working nicely together. Right, so I could, if I wanted to, I could just kind of focus more on a pushing pattern, where it's like you push into the dough, push, right? Push and slap it over like that. But I like to think, I've worked in a couple bakeries before, and I like to think sometimes about how the dough mixer works. It just kind of gives a nice evenness to the way it pulls the dough through the big bowl. Right, so here what I'm starting to do is go more into a side to side weight shift, right? And I'm keeping my arms here, kind of in that Tai Chi sort of posture, so I'm not going into this pattern. So as I go around like this, I can keep my hands, even though the muscles are working in my hands, they're relatively relaxed, and it's not putting too much stress into any of the joints of my wrist or my thumbs as I do that. Because if you work in a bakery, it's like you really have to develop an efficient technique And I'm not saying I'm a professional baker, I just like to play around with this kind of thing. When I was younger, I thought I would be a professional baker, but then eventually I was like getting tired of washing all the dishes. All right, so this is starting to shape up pretty nicely, and it's been about 4 or 5 minutes or so. All right, so it's pretty smooth. Okay, so I'm going to clean off my hands a little bit, and then I'm going to start using the scraper in one hand. All right, so here. All right, so that'll give me a good clump that I can start to work in this kind of a pattern here. All right, so again, use the body there. And if you want, you can start to experiment with the oppositional movement principle. Right, so that would be, as I start to push here, I start to move backwards, right, to get that motion, right? So I'm here, I start to push, but I move backwards as I push. Just that initial movement, then you can shift your weight forward, right? But that initial movement of your back backwards lets this arm go forward without immediately engaging all of your shoulder musculature. All right, so that would be if I'm pushing. All right, so here I'm pushing, like that sort of a thing. And then if I wanted to, on the pull, all right, so if I'm going this way, I have a big pile of dough there. So as I start to pull, I'm moving forward, right? So I move forward, and that starts to bring my arm backwards, right? So there is the pattern, right? So here, here. So I can kind of put it together, right? So here now, as I start to push, there's a backwards, I pull forwards, right? So back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, right? So oppositional movement, right? Practice that as you do your Tai Chi, and you'll see that it'll get much better, right? You'll start to feel like your body is more connected, right? Which means you have more power. If you want to do this in another kind of a system, like let's say if you're doing wrestling or grappling, right? You want to bring that opponent closer to you. Move, instead of pulling first with your arms, move your body towards them, right? And then finish whatever the technique is that you want to do. Right, so it's not really just a Tai Chi principle. This is just really biomechanics and physics. But the way I understand this stuff is through Tai Chi. Right, so lastly, I could start to think about my center, right, so the Dantian, and I think of it rotating. Right, so I'm going to work just for now like with the horizontal rotation. Right, so it's like I'll feel there's rotation in my center, rotation, rotation. Right, so you get that feeling. Change the direction. Go like 3 times. Then I'll change the direction. So you get that feeling that your core, your pelvic floor, your hips, your abdominals, your back, right? It's not just clenching the muscles, right? It's having a sense that there's something alive in those muscles, so there's movement, right? So the image of a ball rotating, right, can be really helpful for getting that sort of a thing. All right, so that's taking me near the end. Obviously, my hands are too sticky to turn this thing off, and I don't have anyone here to help me right now. All right, so we're going to transfer the dough into the bucket, where it'll rest for about half an hour, and then I'll start to do a series of stretch and folds. Right, so that's when you pull the dough up and you let it slap down, right? Because you're still, for this first couple hours, you're just developing the gluten before you set it in the refrigerator for the bulk fermentation. And that, my friends, is how I like to knead bread. And there's my timer, right? So I finished on time. Right? You can certainly play with this technique when you wash the dishes, right? So it's similar kind of concept, right? I'm just going to turn this off now.